in either incarceration rates or basically in custody numbers for Indigenous peoples?
Yeah, it's. I have to tell you that my mandate is limited to federal corrections, and one thing that corrections believe is that they do not have control, which I think is accurate, in the number of people being admitted into their penitentiaries. However, where I disagree is that they do have the authority and the power and the means to effect change and have an impact on public safety by ensuring that those who are incarcerated in their facilities are prepared and for release, for safe and a gradual release. And they may be able to make a significant contribution to public safety. It's clear to me that a lot of the problems that corrections are facing are challenging, and they should be dealt with far sooner than before they arrive in their correctional facilities. So in my personal view, and as I say, this is outside my mandate, it's clear that in Canadian society, Indigenous people do not benefit from socioeconomic, cultural, Indigenous rights as the rest of Canadians. So there are some incredible sort of disadvantages, and some of those are, of course, rooted in historical factors.
Doctor, sorry, I just have so many questions in limited time, if I could. So, given the fact that over the last 20 years, despite resources being put into the correctional service to improve the situation, according to your report, there hasn't been any measurable difference. So, having said that, what specific recommendations could you tell us now that might be able to have some kind of impact? Because I don't think continuing on this path for another 20 years is sustainable or the right thing to do. So I'm open to your suggestions.
Yeah, I think it's clear to me that throwing more money and doing the same kind of recipe isn't going to improve the situation for those who are incarcerated in federal facilities. And I've made a number of pointed, bold recommendations that after consultation with Indigenous organization and leaders, as well as my staff, including Hazel, it's clear to me that one thing the correction should do is to first start to transfer those 4 CSC-operated healing lodges to Indigenous communities or Indigenous organization. And the biggest commitment should be about reallocating a significant amount of its funding to Indigenous communities or organization to create new Section 81 agreements and increase bed capacity. And this reallocation exercise doesn't cost the government a dime. It's simply a reallocation exercise. And then we've also made some recommendations about extending pathway services to all Indigenous people, not just a handful.
Sorry, Doctor, less than a minute. Yep. I have one more important question based on what you had mentioned. There's an article here from the Saskatoon Star Phoenix dated September 3rd, 2023. It just mentioned over a 4-year period from 2017 to 2021, there were 56 escapes of federal inmates. 43% happened at healing lodges. Now, these, my understanding, are the federally run healing lodges rather than those run by Indigenous communities. Is there obviously, besides having more elder support and more supports in the community, How quickly can we make that transition over to Indigenous-led healing lodges rather than the correctional service running these? Because there seems to be, based on the information you're presenting today, a very stark difference in how both are operated.
I think if the service was in full commitment to shift some of its resources, this would not happen overnight. And I think you could plan over 1 decade to actually shift, something in the neighborhood of $500 million easily to build that capacity. And I'm sure that through attrition that this could be done, and through a concerted effort and support from the central agency, that would be an achievable goal.
Thank you. We're out of time on that one. We'll move now to Mr. Batiste for the first 6 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Zinger, and thank you for the shedding light on the reality of where we are in the correction system in Canada with Indigenous people. I'm wondering if you have any ability to give us any insight as to, is there any correlation that you have found between those who are either second generation or third generation Indian residential school survivors within their family, and the correlation between that and the amount of and those who are currently serving in penitentiaries. What I'm really trying to look towards is the root causes of why. I reject any notion that Indigenous people out of a culture or because of any race-based solutions are more apt to commit crimes, rather looking at the root of why. And, from listening to elders, being from Nova Scotia, where the Donald Marshall Jr. inquiries said that, systemic racism is present within the justice system, and it often fails Indigenous people at every turn. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about the root causes of what we're finding about those who are currently serving, and some of the root causes as to what happens that creates the atmosphere where they end up in federal institutions.
Maybe I'd like to ask Hazel to provide you a response, and maybe I'll complement her response if needed. Just let it
go. Some of the root causes are related to the residential school and all the trauma that came from that. A lot of intergenerational trauma and issues facing the younger fellas that are coming into the system, and unfortunately, when you look at their files and see why they're coming into the system, it's almost like when you talk about residential school, they look at the institutions as a new residential school now. And those are still some of the causes as to why they're coming into care or into custody. Did that answer your?
Yes, and I thought that would probably be the correlation, is because, with the residential schools, people were taken from their homes, they were removed from their families, they were not given any love, in fact, given all kinds of abuses, and this was over several generations. And so I have to push back, Dr. Ziegler, when you say it's been 20 years and we've seen no progress, but how many years do you think it would take to undo the generation upon generation upon generation neglect and harm done to Indigenous people by the hands of the justice system and governments? Do we just say 20 years has been enough and just stop throwing money at the situation?
That's what I can tell you is that if you look at, for example, the incarceration rate, which is way higher for Indigenous people than for non-Indigenous people, and you use that as a barometer to assess the success and failures of our broad public policies. I would argue that if you were able to stop the trend, which has been linear and it's getting worse year after year, and even reverse that trend in terms of incarceration rate, you would find that you would have made gains in issues such as education, housing, healthcare, and employment, and anti-racism initiatives, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the incarceration rate, it's probably not it's a rough measure, but it speaks to all those areas where that needs to be addressed in the community.
During your testimony, you said that you thought that if Indigenous offenders were given more opportunity to practice their rights, that this would help the situation. Can you expand on that a little bit more and how you feel like by ensuring their Indigenous rights that there would be less likely to have the current problems that we have?
Well, let me give you an example. 3 weeks ago, I visited Edmonton Institution, which is a standalone maximum security institution. It's currently, I think it had at the time about 230 incarcerated individuals. It is so dysfunctional that now they're basically running 12 separate subpopulations within that penitentiary. That means that none of those subpopulations can mix among themselves. So it's like running 12 separate penitentiary inside of penitentiaries. Because of that, it puts extraordinary pressure to have access to programs and services. So, for example, Edmonton Institution probably has over 70% are Indigenous in Edmonton Institution. There was no access to the prison industry, which is called Corcan. So, no access to vocational training that Corcan is supposed to give. There were only 8 individuals who 3 times a week would have access to what they call the pre-pathways services. 8 out of 230. And when it comes to school, because you can't mix all the students together, they're lucky if they get twice a week for 2.5 hours school, even though they would like to spend the whole day at school just like anybody else to try to upgrade their education.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to interrupt. We are out of time on this one. I will get you a minute to just to briefly or quickly conclude. But bells have started, which means that now they're going again. I'd like to propose that we get through at least this round of questions, which would be another 12 minutes. I need unanimous consent to do that. So would we agree? Okay, so we'll do that. So if you want to just one concluding sentence to Mr. Batiste, or if you're good, then I'll move to Monsieur Lemire. And, okay, well, Monsieur Lemire, the floor is yours for 6 minutes. Sebastian, are you're ready to go? The floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Parfait. Désolé, je pensais qu'il restait un peu de temps à M.
Thank you. I thought that Mr. Batiste still had some time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Zinger, for your presentation and for shedding light on such an important matter. A friend of my family, Jean-Charles Coutu, is a retired judge, and this individual worked for more than 20 years in different communities, and he produced a report. And I actually visited him over the holidays, and he was telling me that he was quite sad that his report did not really get enough attention. And there are some elements maybe from that report that might be useful for us. In an interview, and he was recently actually nominated to the Order of Canada, and he received that very high distinction over the past years. He was saying that